I am going to show you the Sustainability Edition of CES EduPack 2017. When you open CES EduPack, you will find a list of available databases. We will start with the Sustainability Level 2 database, this one here. If you want more information about this database, you can click this I button there, and you will have information about all the tools and the background for this database. By default, we are in the browse mode of the software, which means that we have access to all the available materials here in this window. If we open up these folders, we can see that we have a few of the folders have an I symbol there. That means that you can find additional information, general information about this family of materials. So if I click metals and alloys, for example, here, we will have information about generally on metal alloys and their typical properties. If you want to have information about individual materials, you need to go into one of these other folders here. For example, if we open the ferrous metal folder, we can have a look at cast iron. Let's take this one. As you can see, we have loads of information here and pictures and illustrations about this material. We have the composition, and we have various properties here, general properties, mechanical properties, thermal properties, and so on. And quite a lot of durability properties. If you want a little bit more condensed information, you can change the view here with the drop-down menu and look at the main properties only. And that will take you to a more manageable size data record. We still have all the main mechanical properties, etc. And as you can see here, we have some information about processability and eco-properties. There is also, in this case, a phase diagram of iron carbon, and at the bottom we have a number of links, and we can see here that we have sustainability links to the Nations of the World database and a link to the elements that are contained in this material. I'm going to show you the process universe link here. This one is very important, and it takes you to the data we have on different manufacturing processes. So if we open, for example, this one about casting, we can go in and find more information about investment casting. For example, same style of information, some pictures, general information, a principle of how it works, and then some data. We can also have a look at some other data tables. In this window here, we can switch from the materials universe to have a look at, for example, the database containing legislation and regulations. And these are ordered alphabetically here. So if we have a look at the EU directives, for example, we can see here that we have information about the battery directive, for example. So this means a brief description of the directive. It's not the whole directive itself, but it has some additional information and some further links. We can also change data table and explore the elements database. That's the top one there. Now the elements are organized alphabetically. So to see elements, we can, for example, go and look at beryllium, which is an interesting aerospace material. And we see that the elements database contains more or less similar information to the materials data. It has some basic information, and we have added electronic structure of this element. There is some crystallographic information, the crystal structure, and some lattice parameters here. And then we come to a section of data which is very relevant to sustainability. So we have, for example, the geoeconomic data here, which brings us the typical exploited ore grade, and the abundance of this element in Earth's crust. And we also have a list here of the main mining areas of this element. So we can see here that China is a big producer of beryllium, for example. Again, we find eco-properties, which is the embodied energy, carbon dioxide footprint, and the water usage for the production of 1 kilo of this element. Here is a section that details information about criticality. So it tells you if this element is on the EU or US critical materials list. And we have, of course, also the normal mechanical and thermal properties and so on. At the end, for the metals, there is usually a sort of a list about principal substitution. If you want to substitute this element with something else, you have some recommendations here what might be suitable depending on your application. Okay, so let me now go to level 3, and the way to change the database is to use the change button there, which takes you back to this screen, and we can go into the advanced section of the databases and press for level 3 sustainability. Again, we see in the browse mode that we have a list of folders here for the different types of materials. We can just open some example of polymer materials here, plastics, thermoplastics, for example, and we can immediately see that there's a large number of materials in this database. So the level 3 databases contain almost 4,000 different engineering materials, whereas the level 2 database that we were looking at before contains some 100 engineering materials. So what can you do with this database now? Well, let's go into some databases that exist only in level 3. So as you can see from this list, it has the elements, the legislation and materials and so on. But it also has information about power systems, so energy storage and low carbon power production. So for example, if we go into the energy storage database here, we can see that we have a list of different materials used for batteries. So lithium-ion batteries here, for example, contain some information about the principle of this battery, some pictures, and some data on the resource intensity and so on. So that can be quite useful, and that exists only in level 3. We can also use level 3 if we want to make plots. Let's make a plot using the Nations of the World database. Now this one is very unique to the Sustainability Edition, and it gives you a list of more than 200 nations of the world and information about the social status. For example, in Europe here we have a lot of data records, one for every country, and we have information about the population and so on, the social conditions in Sweden, the educational system, human rights and good governance, corruption, freedom of press, the economic data, GDP and so on, some information about health and the energy use in Sweden. So all of this makes it very easy to look into sustainability issues, where you really need to assess where to source materials from depending on the conditions of each country, for example. Okay, let's use the Nations of the World just to have an example of what kind of plots you can do. Of course, you can plot all the mechanical properties and so on in the database, but for the Nations of the World, we can try to make a plot of some sustainability parameters. So to make a plot, we're going to use this third tool button there, and we're going to have to switch database to Nations of the World. And to make a chart, you click this tool button, and here you get to specify what do you want to see on the y-axis and on the x-axis. So I suggest that we use some of the properties that are contained in the nations of the world. So on this list here, there's a drop-down menu with all the available parameters. And why not check the ecological footprint, for example, on the y-axis. And we can study an interesting correlation between the ecological footprint and, for example, the GDP per capita. And with just those few clicks, we have prepared a chart here that describes the correlation between GDP per capita and the ecological footprint. Now you can annotate this with some of these features here. For example, I can emphasize the trend here in this data, and we can start to look for individual contributions here. We can see at the bottom of this list, with very low GDP per capita and also very low ecological footprint, we have Eritrea. And at the top here we have countries such as Luxembourg and Qatar, which are economically very successful, but that also give a very large ecological footprint. Okay, those were a few examples of what you can do with the Sustainability Edition and the databases we have in EduPack.